I think President Trump approaches this as a realist, right? You take the world as it is, not how you want it to be, not how you wish it would be, but actually how it is. And the truth of the matter is, and a lot of people won't say it, is the Ukrainians have been losing for a long time. They've lost 20% of their territory. They have a manpower problem. They have a munitions problem. I think what President Trump is trying to accomplish is maintain Ukrainian sovereignty, make sure there's a pathway to rebuild the country, and also lessen the likelihood that this will ever happen again. And so they put forward a proposal, a framework. Secretary of State Rubio, the Secretary of the Army Driscoll, they're all in Geneva right now working with the Ukrainians, working with the Europeans to try to get to some consensus here on the 28 points. I would say that most of those, at least half of those, have been talked about for a long time, and there's a lot of agreement. So you got to narrow the gap now and try to get to a place where you recognize the realities on the ground. And I have to say that the Washington consensus has been so wrong about this, Shannon, for so long, and they've been wrong about a lot of things over the last 30 years. President Trump is coming in and saying, we want to actually end the killing, because the people that are critical of this right now, they don't really have another plan. And they live in this fantasy world that another round of sanctions or another round of weapons or another round of cash is going to solve the problem, and it won't. And so I think you recognize the realities and you try to bring the parties together to end the war and make sure this doesn't happen again.
That was Senator Schmidt discussing and talking about the 28-point plan that President Trump has basically given, I believe now is 3 days to respond, to accept. Or he told Zelensky in Europe, you're on your own if you don't do it. George Beebe is one of the few Americans who has studied Russia from inside the machinery that actually makes decisions. He spent more than 20 years inside the national security system as director of Russia analysis at the Central Intelligence Agency, as head of the CIA's Open Source Center, and as a staff advisor on Russia to Vice President Dick Cheney. Today, he serves as director of grand strategy at the Quincy Institute, where he studies how major powers collide, negotiate, or stumble into war. This moment is exactly the type of moment he has warned us about. The Russia-Ukraine war is entering a dangerous new phase, as some have reported. President Trump's team has just put forward a peace plan that demands major concessions from both sides. Senator Marco Rubio just returned from Geneva, saying he is more optimistic than at any point in the last few years that this war can actually end. Zelensky has publicly rejected core elements of the Trump's plan. European leaders are signaling fear, confusion, and in some cases, outrage that the United States wants to impose a settlement. At the same time, here at home, well, we'll talk about that later. George Beebe, welcome back to Detroit's Morning Answer.
Thank you very much.
Let's go straight into President Trump's peace plan. You know, the leaked draft proposes major concessions, territorial compromises, constraints on Ukraine's military. I think they want to cap it at 600,000, and an end to NATO troop presence. From your perspective, is this plan even remotely viable for Kiev or for Moscow?
Well, actually, I think it is. And I agree with everything that Senator Schmidt said in that opening segment that you played here. I think this is a very realistic compromise that involves concessions from both sides. Certainly, there's no way this war is going to end if there is not some prohibition on Ukraine's membership in NATO or on NATO's ability to put combat forces on Ukrainian territory. Those are core Russian security concerns. They're not going to end this war until they are satisfied that we have addressed those issues. But the Russians are also offering a very clear concession on their part, a reciprocal move that says they will not block Ukraine's membership in the European Union. In other words, they're saying as long as our security concerns are addressed, then we are okay with Ukraine being politically and economically anchored in the West. And that is an enormous victory, I believe, for Ukraine. It offers a way toward future prosperity and democracy that is, I think, very much in Ukraine's interest, very much in the U.S. and European interest to nail that down. Yeah. So I think this is a viable plan.
So why do you have CNN reporting that European leaders are confused, they're worried, and in some cases alarmed by the U.S. plan? Do you think this is genuine geopolitical concern, or are European governments reacting to a loss of what I would call strategic control?
Europe does not want Russia to be a player, the EU and NATO. and put Russia on the other side of that as an outsider. The problem with that vision is that Russia is part of the European security arrangement, inevitably so. Russia is a nuclear superpower. Russia has the largest military in the European theater by far. If we're going to take decisions about European security without Russia's involvement that affect Russian interests, the Russians are going to do something about it. So our choice here is either we go to war to defeat the Russians, which is not viable, or we recognize that we're going to have to reach some compromises with them.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump has basically said that. What did he want it before Thanksgiving or after Thanksgiving? Is that a reasonable ask? And do you think that happens?
Well, I think the reports out of Geneva last night from Secretary Rubio and Andrei Yermak, who led the Ukrainian delegation, suggest that it is realistic, that we're making some rapid progress on this. And the president certainly wants to move this forward. He's not content with talking for the sake of talking, and he doesn't want people to drag their feet. He wants to get this done. So he is putting pressure to get this done quickly, and rightly so.
Yeah. How much of an interest does China have in ending this war before it destabilizes further? Do you think there's some back channels with them as well as it relates to ending this war?
Well, I don't know to what degree there are back channels, but I think the Chinese want to see this war end for a number of reasons. Number one, they have their own concerns about territorial integrity. They feel that the West has undermined China's territorial integrity over the centuries, so they sympathize with the Ukrainians on this. On the other hand, they don't want to see this escalate into a nuclear confrontation between Russia and the West. That would spell bad news for China because they would inevitably get dragged into that in some way. And I think they don't want the Europeans to view China as part of the problem, as part of Russia's aggression. So they want to stand for a settlement here in part so that they can preserve a robust trade relationship with Europe as they worry about the trade relationship that they have with the United States.
I'm glad you said the word aggression because critics are arguing that forcing Ukraine to negotiate, they believe it rewards aggression. What realists, like I'm sure you are, they argue that refusing to negotiate guarantees more bloodshed. Where do you land? What does a reasonable negotiation actually look like in a conflict involving Russia as a nuclear power?
Well, we have several very clear interests here. One, of course, is not getting into a direct military confrontation with Russia, which would be a disaster for the United States and for Russia and for the world. But if you're going to negotiate, there has to be a compromise. You're going to have to give as well as get. And so critics that say, we're making concessions as part of this, my reaction to this is, okay, what's your alternative? Yeah. Your alternative is to make no concessions. And if you make no concessions, then you're not negotiating. You're not compromising. And that means you're going to have to win by force. So how does that work? And right now, I don't see a path toward an unconditional victory here. Yeah. We're not going to get that.
Yeah, I want to kind of pivot because a sitting U.S. senator and a couple of other Congress people released a video telling troops and intelligence officers to refuse or disobey unlawful orders or what they deem unlawful. I wanted you to get this take on Brian Jew. He's a former CIA officer. I want you to hear what he has to say, and I would love to get your take as somebody who's been there.
Is this seditious, what they're doing?
It is. And look, we need to be very, very clear about Slotkin and who she is. So she knew what she was doing when she put that together. As a former CIA operations officer, my job was to go out in the field and collect the intel, conduct the operation. Her job as an analyst was to figure out whether or not things like propaganda operations were successful, if they were effective. So she has seen her fair share of propaganda operations, and she knows how to pull those off and make them effective. So if you think about it through that lens, if you watch the video again, one of the first things that she and the others do is they establish credibility and authority. They talk about who they are, working for the CIA and working for the military. They then move into the next phase of the propaganda message, which is there's a crisis. They create a crisis for the listeners inside the FBI and the CIA and the military. And they say that there is a threat. not just abroad, like we might face with China or Russia or Al-Qaeda, but inside of the country. The threat is here. Who's that threat? Donald Trump. Then they provide the solution as part of their propaganda campaign, which is rise up, say no. Now, key parts of propaganda campaigns is you say a little bit of a face-saving measure, something a little wink, a little nudge, to just give somebody a little bit of a fig leaf, which is, but make your opposition towards an unlawful order, right? So that's the fig leaf. And then they come back and they end it with that little bow on top of it, which is, again, to say, rise up. You have an obligation. It's not just something you might want to do, you should do. The point is, Ms. Slotkin knew exactly what she was putting together with her little propaganda video. Now, whether the others were also seditious with her, I don't know. But she knew, because she and I both work at the agency. We both know propaganda ops, and that's exactly what her video was all about.
George Beebe, do you agree with Brian Drew as it relates to, I mean, I don't know if you've heard the video, you saw the video. Do you agree with Brian Drew's assessment of how she went about? Basically, it sounds like a psyop to me.
Well, encouraging individual American government officials to defy their directives and orders from their superiors is a very, very dangerous thing to urge. I don't think that individual Americans get to apply their own definition of what's lawful or unlawful to all this. We have responsibilities as citizens to comply with the law. And it's not like you can go to court and say, well, you know, Your Honor, I just disagree with the validity of this law, and I'm not going to comply with it because I don't agree with it. You know, that's a formula for chaos, not for order and you know, Republican government. So I think this is a very dangerous admonition that she's putting forward here.
Yeah, especially when she answered the question in this manner.
So let's talk right now. Do you believe President Trump has issued any illegal orders?
To my knowledge, I am not aware of things that are illegal, but certainly there are some legal gymnastics that are going on with these Caribbean strikes and everything related to Venezuela.
So, George Beebe, my question to you is, why do it then?
Well, clearly for political purposes. This is someone that's trying to make headlines, get attention, and that sort of thing in our current media environment seems to be rewarded. You say outrageous, controversial things, you get attention, and with that comes, you know, political influence. So I think it's a pretty simple strategy that she's pursuing here.
Yeah, I think when you look at everything that this president has had to endure, especially the assassination attempt and the attempted assassination attempt, and to now put this into the minds of the men and women who protect and defend this country, I think that's asinine. I think. Do you believe it falls under seditious conspiracy?
Well, it's certainly open for debate, yes.
George, when you look at everything that you have warned about over the years, what is the single most urgent message that you believe U.S. policymakers need to understand right now?
Well, I think the number one thing that I've tried to impress upon people is that we should not be complacent about the prospect of nuclear confrontation with Russia, that we have been in an escalatory spiral now for several decades, that if it is not arrested by diplomacy, will continue to escalate into a very dangerous confrontation. Now, fortunately, I think President Trump gets this, and he is taking steps to end this confrontation and find a compromise way forward and manage our differences with Russia.
Yeah. If the United States, let's say we broker this peace deal, what's the next global flashpoint you think that policymakers, President Trump, that they must prepare for? What's lurking out there? Is it China, Taiwan? Because I think a lot of world leaders are waiting President Trump out, knowing that in 3 years he's going to be done, and then they're looking to see who's going to be the next person they have to deal with. What's the next global flashpoint Washington must prepare for right now?
Well, I think the Taiwan issue vis-a-vis China is clearly at the top of that list. That is one that combines the possibility of a military confrontation with nuclear arsenals, and the Chinese are certainly engaged in a very large buildup of their strategic nuclear forces. So that is a confrontation that we cannot afford to be complacent about. it will require a high degree of statesmanship to manage.
All right. Now, George Beebe, this is the most serious question I'm going to ask you today. Thanksgiving. What does a Thanksgiving look like in the George Beebe house?
Well, it's probably pretty mainstream. I think we as a family go to church. We have our turkey dinner, and then we relax, throw the football around, watch a few football games, and think about all the blessings we have experienced in our lives.
Well, I'm one. A lot of my family and friends will not come to my house because of my politics and who I support as it relates to President Trump. I think that's just the most dumbest thing ever. My politics doesn't define who I am. It's just a part of who I am, but it doesn't define me. What would be a message if there? Because I know there are people listening. I have people on both sides of the aisle who listen to this show. What's a message that you would give to them about this Thanksgiving as it relates to being thankful for things?
Well, I think all of us have reason to be deeply grateful for all the blessings in our lives, and that's going to vary from individual to individual and family to family. But we are all part of a great country, a great political tradition that allows us to discuss our political differences and debate them and to be open about all of this. So rather than focusing on what divides us, what polarizes us, we can, I think, all be grateful that we live in a country that we can have these differences civilly.
Amen. George Beebe, Director of Grand Strategy at the Quincy Institute, former Director of the CIA's Open Source Center. Thanks so much for joining us today on Detroit's Morning Answer. Happy Thanksgiving to you and to all you love and your family, your friends. And I really, really appreciate your candor, your frankness, and your honesty about a lot of these issues that you come on to talk about on Detroit's Morning Answer. And I really do appreciate you. Every time I call, you come on to the show. So I appreciate you, sir.
Great. Well, thank you, and same to you.
All right. That's George Beebe, Director of Grand Strategy at the Quincy Institute. Detroit's Morning Answer. We'll be right back.